Okay, so I'll get to the movie in a second here, but just thought I'd make some announcements because I do a lot of these. I apologize for not having more originally scripted content on here lately. It's just it getting into the new year. I'm trying to keep busy with so many different things, and it gets hard to kind of sit down and write out a script. I hope to just sit down and write out a script this weekend for Mike's Movies and Music. I got some cool ideas with regards to February and a real mix type video and things like that. So I know I keep saying you keep hearing me say this over and over in a lot of these videos that scripted material and the other programs are on their way, and they are. It's just it gets a little it gets busy, and this isn't my day job. This is a nice little hobby I do on the side. So whatever I can do, whatever I can put up, that'll have to suffice. um, so I probably should have gotten around to this movie a while back. Well, last year at least, as in like a couple of weeks ago. But I just never really got around to it up until today, and finally got to take a look at this documentary, Blackfish. And holy shit, this okay in a year that had movies like Prisoners and 12 Years a Slave, um, and a plethora of other films that just had bleakness and were just depressing and and were heavy as hell in terms of their emotional heft. This by far trumps all of them. Probably because it's real life, but also the fact that my God, this film is haunting. For those of you who aren't in the know, Blackfish is essentially the documentary focusing on um, keeping species in captivity, specifically SeaWorld, and especially their killer whales, who have had a very, very messy track record of brutally mutilating and killing their trainers. I mean that's part of the horrific stuff, but also the horrific stuff is like, the conditions these animals, you see these animals living in and everything like that. It is just haunting on all fronts. Um, and it follows primarily this one killer whale, this male named Tilikum, from when he was fucking captured and basically separated from his pod, from his family in like 1983, and then brought to this ring-a-ding-ding Canadian Sealand type park where he was just brutalized and beaten up by the females, because the females in the orcas societal chains, I guess, are the more domineering, more uh, dominating, and yeah, more intimidating uh, members of those little social circles, um, and how essentially just kind of developed into a whale with a monumental chip on its floppy dorsal fin, which is just as you hear more and more about the stories about this whale and you see more and more of him in this, it gets so heartbreaking to watch him. And we'll get into more of that. But eventually that park closes down, and then these killer whales are shipped over to SeaWorld in Orlando. And you get to meet a lot of former SeaWorld trainers, and hear about their experiences and how, like, throughout this movie, you at first I was kind of like neutral. I'm like, okay, what are they going to tell us? What are they going to actually share with us? They're former trainers, you know, I get it. Some maybe they left or they retired, what have you. But as the movie goes on, you sympathize not only with the whales but with these people as well, because I felt so bad for these people in this film because they're essentially the equivalent of like just a working stiff in this. They're not, they're not. none of them are really in-depth marine biologists or anything like that. They're not the forward-thinking experts in their field. They're animal trainers who are basically kind of thrown into the mix pretty quick by all their accounts. They kind of just learn on the fly and are, from the sound of it, are being kind of lied to and blocked out by the higher ups in SeaWorld's executive, board and so forth. With regards to safety, with regards to incidents that occur involving the trainers and the animals, like this is such a disheartening and retroactively makes me feel guilty about being a kid who once was in awe of not the park, but I mean, of what they did there. Because I mean, you got to give them that much credit. Is that it takes some major lug nuts to get in the water with these animals and to have a modicum of comfort and familiarity with them. And the way they talk about it, it's like, yeah, they love their job of working with these creatures. They love these creatures. And it as the movie goes on and you hear about more and more tragedies occurring involving, trainers getting harmed by the animals or getting killed, that just you feel so bad for both the victims, the animals involved, and who essentially are victims as well, and these trainers who are recounting these stories and who became so disillusioned with what they thought would be like the best job in the world. You would want to work with a highly intelligent, and regal type of animal like a killer whale, up until the bad stuff. And it took me a while to well up on Prisoners. It took me a while to well up on 12 Years a Slave. Fuck, I was bawling, not bawling, but I was definitely misty-eyed a little bit, if you can tell. Like about 10, not 10 minutes even, like 5 minutes into this thing. This was so... It's like I said, it's haunting. It's bleak and depressing about the horrific things this one whale, but also I'm sure many other animals have to endure in terms of living conditions. And when he was first put in that Canadian park and so forth, they had this really cramped space where they had all the whales, and even as they grew, they wouldn't accommodate for more space. And then so this poor guy, this Tilikum, this poor whale would get all slashed up and raked by the other's teeth and everything like that, and would just be isolated, essentially, be kind of singled out. And what does that do to an animal? Especially when they also have actual like whale experts and people from, because part of it also is they're following like the OSHA investigation on safety procedures and handling and so forth of the animals, and you kind of get clips here and there of like testimonials from the court case involving SeaWorld, and then they call in some of their witnesses. OSHA calls in some of their witnesses who are the experts in like whale biology and so forth, and you learn, like I was actually fascinated by this stuff, but the fact that like the brain of an orca is set up to be far more receptive to a sense of self, a sense of emotional. I mean, I've always known that the whales, dolphins, animals of that particular strain, of that particular ilk, they've always come off as being very highly intelligent, being very self-aware. But the fact that they have a strong sense of community too and familiar, that each pod essentially has its own culture, its own language, and when you contrast that with what goes on in SeaWorld, where they keep showing you like the bubbly images of like, oh, they're all a family, which this documentary does very well. It presents all these commercials you've seen on TV involving SeaWorld, involving like how oh, these whales they're all buddies, they're all family and everything like that. And then you put them in this film and with these testimonials, with these accounts, it is unnerving watching these commercials again. Like I remember watching these commercials on TV. Back in the day, or even probably still now, Jesus. But and like you'll never look at a SeaWorld commercial like the same way again after watching this movie. It's unnerving to see how I guess thick they expect people to be, that like, oh yeah, well all the whales get along. Yeah, they're all ocean buddies being in a cramped fucking space together for God knows how many years, and they're not even from the same familial unit. They can't talk to each other or communicate to each other in any way, and in that sense with their clicks and whistles, it is draining. And to hear these stories, and it also follows primarily also the case in 2010 um, involving the one of the trainers getting horribly butchered by Telecom, who by the way is not out in the wild, still doing shows. Fuck. it, it's so disheartening, and the footage they're able to procure for this movie of these incidents, of training sessions, of when things don't go according to the plan that SeaWorld has in mind. It like I'm sitting screaming like no, like that was me like watching. I'm like, oh no, they're gonna show that. Oh my God, like yeah. Like I was stunned. I was in disbelief of what I was seeing at times. There's a good chunk of this film where they're talking about this one trainer named Ken Peters, who was supposed to kind of round out one of the shows. Um, I forget what the stunt was called, but he was supposed to, in tandem with a whale, like one of those where they pop up probably on their like snout and everything and leap up into the water and stuff like that. And the whale just kind of says fuck that plan and either starts getting aggressive with the trainer or starts being aggressively playful with the trainer, um, and drags him under like 3 or 4 times for a minute 20 each. And you see the look of like, well, I guess the guy was like he kind of did a lot of deep sea like scuba diving and everything like that. So you can see he's kind of a little, you can see he's trying to remain as calm as possible, but there's a look in that guy's eyes as he's like trying to pet this whale, as this whale has his fucking foot clamped down in his mouth. He's like, trying to like just calm this whale down, but the look of like terror just in the eyes of this guy, like that's still like sticking with me heavily. And even though he's like, the rest of him he's just like, okay, I gotta take control of the situation. Just he up here, you can just see the fear, and not just with even the humans, like when they separate mother and child in this movie, they separate a calf from its mother to ship it off to another one of the other SeaWorlds in maybe like Texas or something like that. And you have this scene where the mom is just howling in her tank, like and they find out she's trying to do like long range calls, trying to call out to this calf that's no longer there. It is so heartbreaking. It is one of the most heartbreaking, depressing things I have seen in a while. And the sounds that these animals make when they're in agony, when they're suffering, when when they're just even perturbed from all appearances, it is soul crushing, to say the least. Like this, I mean, when you're a kid, as I was saying about retroactively feeling guilty about having enjoyed going to SeaWorld, because I went to SeaWorld probably like, I want to say once maybe when I was a kid, and got splashed, whatever, got to feed a dolphin. You're a kid, and I'm sure these parks have all the best intentions of wanting to educate the youth, but not like that anymore. Like, as I grew up, obviously, you get wiser, you get more in the know about like, well, that's not the most opportune environment for those animals and everything like that. You see Free Willy and you feel like shit. But yeah, as you grow up, you develop a sense of like, no, that's not the natural order of things. Yeah, of course, they should be out in the wild. But then there was always part of me thinking like, well, you know what? Maybe there's rescue and rehabilitation. There's a lot of organizations. There's a lot of zoos and facilities out there that do focus on that. They focus on rescuing those animals that are at risk in the environment at the time. Maybe they were abandoned by their family, or maybe, and so forth. And so there is a period of being able to rescue these animals, heal them, rehabilitate them, and then be able to reintroduce them into the wild. And that was probably just what I was had in my mind was it was like, oh, well, maybe that's just what they do. I am, this is a real, not really an eye opener. I mean, this is pretty, you know, blatantly eye opening. If all the news stories about these attacks over the years haven't opened your eyes up to it, it's like this one's definitely the last like nail in that coffin. Um, like this is definitely like made me kind of swear off that type of stuff. Like I have no intention to ever go to SeaWorld again. I've never had the urge to begin with to go at all. Since I was a wee one, I definitely, if if we still have SeaWorld by the time I have kids or something like that, I'm not taking my kids to see to see them. I yeah, it's definitely God. I feel what 12 Years a Slave did. I'm sure for white people, Blackfish is doing for essentially anyone who's ever gone to SeaWorld. Like, I feel like utter shit for having had a modicum of enjoyment going to that park, even when I was just a little kid who didn't know any better. It is so, so disheartening. Um, Pardon me. Uh, it does message pretty well. And that's the thing, is like throughout the movie, well, with a couple of exceptions. There is like one former trainer who's like, "Oh no, SeaWorld knows exactly what they're doing," like and everything like that. And you hear like the deposit, or you hear like the rebuttals of like some of SeaWorld's head experts, like the head trainer, who I guess in the transcript they say it's like, you know, this whale has aggressive tendencies. Tilikum has aggressive tendencies, but he doesn't act on them. Is what she was basically saying. He's like, oh yeah, he has the possibility to be aggressive, but he doesn't act on it. It's kind of like you being a man. You have the tendency. You might have the impulse to want to be a rapist, but it doesn't mean you're gonna rape me. Yeah, I get. What? It's and that's the thing too. Is like you feel bad, like I said, equally for animal and trainer in some of these instances, because there's a story. They take kind of a segue over to a park that's set up on the coast of like Africa, where this trainer who was trained by SeaWorld, who was trained by the park and was kind of like the ambassador for helping establish this new park with animals from SeaWorld that were transferred over there. And nothing's like prepared at this park at all. Nothing's ready. It's a wreck. The animals aren't in the best of condition, and they have to undergo like you see them undergo like endoscopy and shit like that, because they're like eating at the walls and stuff, and it's like it messes up their stomachs and digestion and so forth. And you see these poor animals like thrashing, and all these people like trying to just hold it down while they're doing like this roto-rooter type shit to it. And they talk about this one trainer, like the one competent trainer they had at that or have at that place, and how he was just butchered by this animal. And you hear like his family talking about it, and how essentially the company lied to them, saying, "Oh, he was like," initially they say he was okay, it was just an incident, and then as they get there, it's like, "Sorry, there was nothing we could do." And then it's not just that he's dead, but that he's like torn to shreds, and you're like, Jesus. But I gotta say, like, the one image that is going to stay in my mind for a long time now. Not for a long time. I mean, it'll stay with me, essentially. I mean, it's kind of on the cover a little bit, but it's just one of the most. As soon as they got to it, it's in the final moments of the movie when they talk about Tillicum, who's still doing shows after after he's proven that he can be a very deadly animal if you piss him off or agitate him in the wrong way. But he's still there doing shows apparently. Like after the 2010 after the 2010 attack, they show footage of him, and all he's doing is just swimming still in a circle in his tank, just around and around. Like you see his fin like just flopped over. Like apparently that happens only in like 1% of the wild when they're out in the wild. But apparently I forget what the technical term is of the dorsal fin not maintaining erectness. But it happens only in 1% of wild orca. Apparently it's 100% for all orca in captivity. But you just see him just going around, like just not even like swimming. He's just kind of just like floating in a still, like in this still water, and just with the droopy fin, and there's no soundtrack going on at the time. It's just so quiet, and it is one of the most haunting visuals I've seen. My heart broke for this animal. I'm like, I am so fucking sad right now just thinking about it. It is one of the saddest, most, again, the word haunting images I have seen in a long time. And that stays with you. This film is remarkably effective at digging its claws into you after you've seen it. And there's so much, like, there's a lot going through me right now. I'm also kind of like coming off of a runner's high. I went to go work out earlier, and I'm got an endorphin buzz, but now I'm like combating that with like this massive, overwhelming wave of depression and anger, because I am so fucking sad now. But I am pissed off too, because I think that's why I watched the movie today, because I heard on the radio this morning while I was driving to work that SeaWorld's as much as they're trying to do Save Face, they're doing all these events. They're doing an event, they did an event either yesterday or tonight in New York City, where they're doing an event in a restaurant to kind of do, I guess, fundraising or meet and greets and stuff like that. They're bringing in live penguins, apparently. Live fucking penguins in a restaurant in New York City with all this glitz and photo, all these for like, I hadn't even seen the movie at that point, and I was pissed off about that. I'm like, fuck, for real? Like, you're taking animals way out of their environment. First off, you're taking them way out of their natural habitat to go to SeaWorld. Now you're taking them way out of the habitat they've become accustomed to go do a photo op with all these flashing lights and overstimulation in one of the most overstimulating cities in the world. Fuck you, SeaWorld. Serious. Now I'm pissed off. Like, and all this to kind of say, like, see, we treat our animals great. We just throw them into a bustling metropolis for no fucking reason. Like, because it's a photo op. Well, I heard that on the radio, and like, I think that's why I wanted to see this movie, essentially, is because just hearing that story pissed me off, and then I'm like, well, I gotta watch this now. Because if these people are that fucking stupid and that fucking greedy to just do that to penguins, I gotta watch what they do to the fucking killer whales now. And I am mad and sad. Straight up. It's it's just so depressed. I mean, I'm wholeheartedly recommending that you watch this movie. I mean, draw from it what you will. You know, because I know there's been a lot of criticism on this film. It's like, oh, it's got an agenda. It's not a real documentary. There's a slant on everything and everything like that. And you know, SeaWorld's rebutting it and everything. They come back with rebuttals about it, and that's what they're doing this fucking photo op for, I'm sure. But you know, it's just a fascinating watch. Anyways, um, I'm certainly not gonna tell you what to think or feel about it and the outcome. If you want to go to SeaWorld, go to SeaWorld. Fine. I personally want nothing to do with SeaWorld anymore. I've never had much to do with it to begin with. I just never want to have to deal with it ever again now. This film has wholeheartedly put me off of that type of stuff. Like, yeah, unless it was like presented to be an actual, and you know, maybe they do those conservation type works. I'm sure they do in some way, shape, or form. It's just, yeah, with animals such as the killer whale, and the fact that there's this all sense of like plausible deniability, and it's like, oh, you know, it wasn't really an attack, it was an incident. And like it started pissing me off too because they talked about the 2010 attack and how they were saying, oh, because she had her hair in a ponytail. He grabbed her by a ponytail. She shouldn't have had her hair in a ponytail. When you see clearly on the footage, the whales got her by the fucking arm. I started yelling at the screen at that. I'm like, fuck you, guy. I was seriously doing this to the screen. I was like, fuck you. I was so mad. I was so upset at that point because I'm like, because they had like an interview with like a former executive of SeaWorld. So it's like, well, she really shouldn't have had her hair up in a ponytail like that. She should have had it in like a bun. Otherwise, he could grab onto it like that. I'm like, fucking really? It's like, she's dead, you asshole. She can't even defend herself. Like, and then they show plenty of pictures of everyone else with ponytails, and they're fine. It's like, what a prick. I'm like, but you know what? And that's the thing. It's like you kind of understand. It's like, well, here's corporate mandate basically setting down. Like, here's what you got to say. Like, as much as they were trying to, as much as maybe the documentary was trying to villainize like the primary witnesses, it's from SeaWorld, like the head trainer or like the head expert they brought in to say that the whale is not an aggressive whale. Like I couldn't even feel mad at them because part of my brain was thinking like they're just repeating what a higher up has told them to say. You know, it's all about that, and the trainers when they recount their stories, it's like they're never given full details. They even say like a lot of the facts they're given about whales aren't even true. Like they say whales will live from like 20 to 35 years. Bullshit. Apparently they live full lives as humans do out in the wild. But yeah, and how a lot of the trainers are like, yeah, half of what we were saying is total bullshit. We were just told to say all this stuff, you know, and it's an interesting watch. I came away from it kind of hollow and depressed, but I was still intrigued by it. Um, it it showed clips of Orca from the 70s in it, and I haven't seen Orca in a long time. I really want to watch that movie now because I'm like, holy shit. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Orca, yeah, there's a movie called Orca. It's about a killer whale who I can't remember exactly. I think I was really young when I saw it. It's about a killer whale seeking revenge on a fisherman for killing his family. I think that's it. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. I want to watch Orca now. I want to watch the whale actually get some comeuppance, or not get some revenge. Um, but yeah, there's lots of sad moments for me in this movie. When they focus on like the whales like howling and grief, they show a close up of Tillicum's eye, and he is crying Like it's not just because he's wet. Like there's a definitive trickle right there, and the reason he's still in captivity is because his sperm is liquid gold. His semen's liquid gold. They show footage of them, the insemination process, or them collecting samples. That was weird. Footage of whales getting jerked off is very bizarre. But okay, sorry, crass joke, blah blah blah. I'm tired. Um, all seriousness, this is a fascinating watch. If you haven't seen it already, I wholly recommend you check it out. Like I said, maybe it'll change your opinion on SeaWorld. Maybe it won't. I mean, my opinion on SeaWorld had been kind of leaning in this direction for many, many years. Ever since I was old enough to understand animals in captivity bad, you know, unless they're actually getting proper care and so forth and are being trained to kind of be reintegrated into the wild. Animals in captivity, not a good thing. So but it was an eye opener in terms of just like I want nothing to do with this corporation or this company ever again. Um, yeah, check it out. Hi, back again. I just wanted to add a little part two to this new thing because what I want to try to do with these reviews now or these vlogs is kind of incorporate a little fun aspect to it because I can get a little heavy-handed in describing or talking about a movie, especially with something like this. It was kind of a heated vlog to say the least. So to keep the levity going and also to kind of just keep the discussion going, to talk about these films because these are fascinating movies. Um, want this movie's getting like high critical acclaim. Like I think it's at 98% right now on Rotten Tomatoes. What I wanted to do was I sifted through like the audience reactions on Rotten Tomatoes to find the not so favorable write-ups or reviews, and wanted to present them here. And you know, some of them do kind of bring a point. This movie isn't full-fledged objective in its intent. I'll acknowledge that in retrospect. There is kind of a bias. You kind of get the sense that there is this underplaying theme of, well, these animals should just be out in the wild. And while I kind of believe that myself, but that's the way I've felt for years. It didn't take this movie for me to be like, oh, that's the way it should always be. No, I've always felt that way about certain facilities, certain theme parks that do it for just entertainment purposes. Fuck those parks to begin with. Um, but also just certain zoological institutes that don't really play up that don't have a hard focus on rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration into the wild as a strong part of their mission statement. Like I've always felt this way, and Blackfish, I'm certainly was jaw dropping in how probably horribly managed SeaWorld is. It didn't change my opinion that I think those animals probably would be better off in the wild. But I also understand that reintegration into the wild can be a long and arduous process. It can take time because if you screw it up for the animal, you know they're fucked out there essentially if they're not properly integrated into a habitat. So yeah, I understand that much about it, like I said, this never really changed my opinion. Like my opinion didn't suddenly shift because of this film. I've had these feelings about these institutes for years, but it's just I will acknowledge that there is kind of a slant in the movie on that, and some of these people acknowledge it pretty well. Um, let's get through some of these. One person said it's just about keeping them in captivity and wanting to let them go. Maybe there's an underlying theme, but you know what? It talks a little bit more about it. I mean, it does talk about like the hazards that can be presented to trainers if they're not properly educated. If there's no proper authority going on with some of these parks, no proper living conditions. It's not fully saying it's like, oh yeah, throw them out in the wild. It's not coming out and saying it, at least. But yeah, like it talks about other aspects than just saying it's like, oh, I want to let him go. Remember, this is only one point of view. Keep an open mind, people. It's funny that this person should mention that because SeaWorld declined to take part in this. But their rebuttal upon the film's release was very adamant, of course. And I think according to some article in Orlando that says they said like they asked like their readers, they polled the readers in Orlando like, well, does this film change your opinion on whales being in captivity? Apparently 99% said no, it didn't change their opinion about whales being in captivity. But surprisingly, 54% of that tally apparently came from an IP address owned by da 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 SeaWorld. Huh. So that's kind of interesting. Um, in retrospect, it would have been kind of nice to see a little bit more of SeaWorld defending itself, maybe more than just the court uh, court transcripts and more than clips here and there of from like news shows. It would have been interesting. It would have been a little bit more of an interesting film. It's a very fascinating film in anyways, but it would have been more fascinating to see if SeaWorld could throw back the curtain for the film and show give give some opportunities to say like, no, here, look at our facilities, they're fine, that we treat the animals right. If they could have, you know been allotted, or not allotted, but if they had been willing to participate and do that. um but I don't know, stuff like the fact that they refused to take part, that's their prerogative, but the fact that 54% of an almost unanimous vote, uh, that responses came from the same IP that's owned by the company, that's a little suspect, to say the least. So it really doesn't help their image. And they're parading penguins around in New York City for photo ops, people. In a restaurant. Fuck. um, this film was a huge disappointment, says this viewer. It lacked a clear focus and was not at all what it claimed to be. This seems more like a sideways attempt to sling mud at SeaWorld in a circumferential manner, though it seems this claim may have had some merit. There seems to have been some deliberate or negligent mismanagement. This film is nothing like the Great Planet Earth series. To my recollection, Planet Earth was about just the way Planet Earth works. This movie, it's not just a documentary on killer whales. If you want just a documentary on killer whales, there's plenty of nature documentaries out there about them. This was about what happens when you take a certain type of animal, take it out of habitat A and throw it into habitat B and mix it in with human variables C, D, and E. So, yeah, it's not about just straight up about, like, because the way Planet Earth was about straight up Planet Earth. No, this is about a specific focus here, deviating just from educating on killer whales. Watch Orca if you want the more accurate. Just kidding. Um, it has its moments, but Blackfish is just a little too dull to really work. I wouldn't call this film dull. Seeing that footage of those trainers is pretty harrowing. It's very emotional to hear to hear family members and so forth talk about basically the last day of their loved one's life. But also there is some fascinating nature documentary. The shots are very beautiful of the whales out in the wild. There's a scene where this pod of whales out in the wild is like cornering this sea lion or whatever on an ice floe, and they're like breaking off chunks of the ice floe, getting closer and closer as they're like coming up out of the water, and this seal just goes in and he's fucked at that point. But that's different. Like I was kind of like, whoa, that's pretty cool. I wasn't like in horror because you know what? That's happening out in nature. That's different. That's the natural order of things taking hold. That's the circle of life, the food chain, whatever you want to call it. That should be happening. I was more in horror about what was going on whenever a show would go wrong with the whale and he'd drag someone down for 3 fucking minutes. So, yeah, I wouldn't say it was dull. This documentary is awful. Does raise some interesting ethical questions, but is clearly biased. I wouldn't call this film awful. I get where they're coming from a little bit with the slant or bias, but you know what? It's a well-made film. It's well put together. It's effective in what it's trying to do. So I'll give it that. This one, the guy's picture for this one, he looks like he's out of the Catholic League, so I'll just give him kind of a hobnobby type voice. Brr, rubbish, brr. This is pure rubbish by CNN, like the always biased Piers Morgan programming. Anyone with an ounce of intelligence knows that the orcas are called killer whales for a reason. They aren't dolphins. Fucking idiot. Dolphins can fuck you up just as much as a whale can. Jesus. Like, and again, this movie shows that some of these trainers, the trainer that was killed in 2010 was considered to be one of the best. She was very safe, very prepared with the animals, knew how to handle the animals. It talks about the unpredictability of these creatures, but at the same time, it also says that these animals aren't just bloodthirsty killers. The whale experts who are, talking about these animals clearly say that they have a vast capacity to be very sociable, be very loving and gentle and affectionate towards, to other creatures. And you see that in the film. You see these whales actually being very pleasant, being very socially engaged. But, something gives eventually with some of these animals, given the environment, given their treatment, something snaps with them. And it's sad, it's heartbreaking. But to say it's like they're called killer whales for a reason. These animals can be gentle. There is a capacity for these animals to be gentle. They're not like dolphins. Fuck you, dude. Dolphins can be just as fucking aggressive. If you haven't seen it, you should check out this thing Robin Williams did back in like the early 90s. It was called Into the Wild, and he basically went out to like swim with wild dolphins. He wanted to learn about dolphins. He went out and swam with some wild dolphins, touched one of them in a wrong way, like petted them in a wrong way, and one of them fucking rams him. And he's like, and he acknowledges it was him fucking up. Like he's like, I'm Robin Williams, and I touched the dolphin the wrong way and pissed him off. Like he does that whole shtick, but he's serious about it too. But dolphins can be just as dangerous. Any animal can be just as dangerous. Granted, probably not as big, but he's like, they aren't dolphins. He's thinking like dolphins are really the cuddliest animals out there compared to the killer whales. Dolphins can be pricks too. Sorry, dolphins. I love you. A brilliantly made and photographed documentary that unfortunately fails on its point of view. Pity for the trainers who play such a big role in why a killer whale acts like a killer whale while treating them like seals. Okay, here's where he starts to get a little cuckoo on me. Serves you right. Yeah, I feel sorry for the whales, but what next? Pity the SS when a Jew cracks their skulls open? Actu libre. Holy, that's a little much and pretty offensive, buddy. First off, yeah, I wouldn't compare SeaWorld trainers to the SS. SeaWorld trainers, from the look of it, are actually pretty pleasant people. From what I see, it's just that the park is horribly, horribly mismanaged, and that they have no sense of liability for these creatures or their facilities or their employees. Even it's just comparing this to Nazi atrocities is a bit much. These people are probably, I guarantee that these trainers are far more pleasant and engaging towards these animals than the Nazis were to the Jews. That's a little much, buddy. And finally, just the funniest one I found on there. It cracked me up as soon as I read it. Yeah, Sir Brendan Tully gets his own movie. It took me a second, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, Blackfish. That cracked me up quite a bit. I laughed pretty hard when I first read that. So that's it. Catch you guys later. Peace.